Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. She was my sister, my blood, my only ally, or so I believed. But when our father passed, she took the crown that was meant for me, and left me with nothing. Before you hear my story, tap subscribe and drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated, discarded like you didn't matter. I used to think the boardroom smelled like home. Not the warm scent of bread fresh from the oven or the comforting musk of my father's study, but the crisp tang of leather chairs, the faint bitterness of coffee that had been poured and abandoned hours ago, and the low hum of whispered ambition that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. That smell meant belonging, at least it used to. I was 24 the last time I sat at that long mahogany table, waiting for my father to begin the quarterly meeting. My pen tapped against my notepad, a nervous rhythm I tried to disguise as focus. Across from me sat my sister, Elena, perfectly poised, her long hair glossy under the recessed lights, her blazer tailored to perfection. She always knew how to look the part. Father cleared his throat, his voice still commanding though his body had grown frail. This company will remain a family legacy. I want both my daughters involved in every step moving forward. I smiled, feeling the familiar surge of pride. I had spent nights poring over reports, memorizing figures, sketching strategies in the margins of my notebooks. This was my world, our world. I thought Elena and I would run it together. But I should have known better. Elena never looked at me as a partner. To her I was a shadow, present but unworthy of notice. She smiled for father, nodded at the board, and occasionally glanced at me as though indulging a child playing dress-up. And the board adored her. When father excused himself midway through the meeting, coughing into a handkerchief, Elena took over effortlessly. She didn't even look at the agenda. She spoke smoothly, confidently, sprinkling in jokes that drew polite laughter, while my carefully prepared notes sat useless in front of me. By the end of the meeting, several members had already asked if Elena could handle the next one. That was the first crack. The following months blurred together in a haze of hospital visits and endless work. Father's health declined faster than any of us wanted to admit. I spent long nights at the office trying to keep the company steady while Elena entertained clients. She called it relationship management. I called it an excuse to attend endless dinners and gallery openings while I slogged through the paperwork. But father never saw the difference. When I told him I'd secured a crucial partnership that would keep our operations afloat, he smiled and said, "That's wonderful, darling. Elena mentioned she's been doing excellent work keeping our investors happy." It was like watching her paint over my efforts with a broader, brighter brush. And then came the day I will never forget. The lawyer's office smelled different from the boardroom, like dust and ink heavy with finality. Father sat between us, pale and trembling, while the lawyer read through the documents. "As per your father's wishes, the controlling shares of the company will pass to Elena Bennett effective immediately. Claire," he looked at me briefly, almost apologetically, "your role will remain advisory." My heart stopped. "Advisory? That's not what we agreed, father, you said." Elena's hand slid across father's, squeezing gently. "Claire, please. This is what's best. You'll still be involved." Her voice was honey, but her eyes, cold steel. I turned to father, searching for the man who had once told me I had the sharpest mind he'd ever seen. But his gaze was downcast, his lips trembling. "It's temporary, Claire. You'll always have a place here. Always have a place. Like a guest. Like a child allowed to sit at the adults' table." When the papers slid across the desk, Elena signed them with a flourish. My hand shook as I added my own reluctant signature, the pen feeling like a dagger. And just like that, everything I'd worked for, everything I'd believed, was gone. The weeks that followed were worse than the signing itself. Elena wasted no time reshaping the company in her image. She dismissed several loyal managers, replacing them with her friends from her glittering social circle. She shifted budgets to fund her pet projects, lavish marketing campaigns, new offices in expensive districts, events dripping with champagne and crystal chandeliers. Meanwhile, the people who had once respected me avoided my gaze in hallways. The new hires whispered behind their manicured hands, their laughter sharp and cruel. I became invisible in the very place I had given my youth to. One night, after yet another board dinner where Elena introduced me as my little sister Claire, she helps out sometimes, I returned to my apartment and found myself staring into the bathroom mirror. My reflection didn't look like me. My eyes were hollow, my shoulders slumped, and my lips pressed so tightly together they'd lost their color. I pressed both palms against the sink and whispered, "This isn't over." The words startled me. My own voice sounded foreign, cold. But the longer I held my reflection's gaze, the more certain I became. It wouldn't be tomorrow. It wouldn't be next month. But one day Elena would know what it felt like to have everything ripped from her hands. I left the family estate the next morning without saying goodbye. Elena didn't call. Father was too ill to notice. The city swallowed me whole, and for a while I let it. I took odd jobs, lived in small apartments, and spent nights planning, not revenge yet, but survival. I read everything I could about finance, acquisitions, corporate law. I studied the patterns of those who had lost it all and rebuilt themselves from ashes. And with each passing year my anger cooled, not into forgiveness but into something sharper. Still, Elena had taken the crown that should have been mine. She wore it proudly, flaunting it in every magazine cover and charity gala. But crowns are heavy. And if you know where to press, even the proudest head will bow. I would return. Not as Claire, the overlooked little sister, but as someone Elena would never see coming. And when I did, the business she stole would be mine. The first time I saw Elena again, she didn't recognize me. I was standing at the edge of a glittering ballroom, the kind where chandeliers rained light onto sequined gowns and the champagne never stopped flowing. The Bennett Group was celebrating its 25th anniversary, a fact that the city's business elite had decided was worth fawning over. Elena stood at the center of it all, a glass of gold-tinted wine in her hand, laughing too loudly at something one of the board members said. She looked exactly the same, perfectly coiffed, draped in couture, her confidence radiating like heat from a fire. But there was a new sharpness around her eyes, a tension I doubted anyone else noticed. I did. She had no idea that the woman watching her from the shadows, dressed in an emerald gown with her hair swept into a severe chignon, wasn't just another guest. I had spent years building this moment. After leaving the estate, I lived small. I worked jobs that paid little but taught me everything. Accounting clerks, legal assistants, junior analysts. I was invisible, and invisibility was freedom. I learned how debts moved through the veins of a company, how to find the quiet cracks no one noticed, how to pull threads without anyone realizing until the fabric unraveled. I saved, invested, doubled and tripled what little I had. Eventually I stopped being invisible. A silent partner in a European firm. A private investor in an Asian tech startup. A ghost in the markets. I wore different names like masks, and behind each one I grew sharper, richer and harder to trace. By the time I returned to this city, I was no longer Claire Bennett. I was Cassandra Hale, an investor whose net worth whispered like a legend in financial circles. Elena's world welcomed me with open arms. "Miss Hale, so good to finally meet you." One of the board members, a man with a red tie that screamed desperation, shook my hand that night. "We've heard so much about your ventures overseas." I smiled, a carefully practiced curve of the lips. "I like to keep busy. Would you like to meet our CEO?" He gestured toward Elena, who was now holding court near the piano. "Yes," I said smoothly. "I'd love that." When Elena turned to me, she offered that same dazzling smile she reserved for people she thought useful. She extended her hand. "Elena Bennett." "Cassandra Hale," I replied, shaking it firmly. "I've been looking forward to this." Her grip tightened just slightly, testing me. She didn't recognize me. My cheekbones were sharper, my hair darker, my posture more assured, but she sensed something. Predators always do. "Well then," she said with a laugh, "let's see if we can find a way to keep you in our circle." Elena. You have no idea. Over the next months, I became a fixture in her orbit. I invested in one of the Bennett Group's subsidiaries, making just enough noise to attract her attention but not enough to raise suspicion. I attended board dinners, charity events, even private retreats. Elena was brilliant at playing the role of the benevolent queen. She'd sweep into rooms in tailored suits, kiss cheeks, and charm men twice her age into giving her what she wanted. But behind closed doors I saw the cracks. She berated assistants until they cried. She dismissed managers for mistakes she had made herself. She spent millions on personal projects, leaving suppliers waiting months for payment. And always she assumed no one was keeping track. I was. The first piece I bought was small. An unpaid debt from a struggling vendor purchased quietly through one of my shell companies. Elena never noticed. The second was larger. A bank loan her company had extended too far on a risky expansion. By the time I acquired the third, a series of outstanding obligations hidden deep within a web of accounting tricks, I knew I had my claws in deep enough that she wouldn't see the hand pulling them. Each acquisition was a needle prick, invisible until you realized the vein was empty. At one particularly lavish dinner, Elena leaned toward me across the table, her smile painted and perfect. You know, Cassandra, I admire women like you. Bold, independent, not afraid to take risks. She sipped her wine. It's rare. I tilted my glass. I could say the same about you. He laughed, delighted. Then perhaps we're more alike than I thought. If only you knew. But beneath the glamour, the cracks widened. Employees whispered of paychecks delayed. Contractors grumbled about unpaid invoices. The once flawless image of the Bennett Group shimmered with instability, though Elena brushed it all off with confidence. The market always fluctuates, she told the board one evening. This is temporary. Trust me. I sat at the far end of the table, watching the beads of sweat glisten at her temple. The same board members who once adored her were starting to question. And every question weakened her. Late one night in my penthouse overlooking the city, I spread the documents across my desk. Debt agreements, acquisition notices, legal loopholes highlighted in neat strokes of red. The Bennett Group was mine. Not yet on paper but in practice. All I needed was the right moment to close the jaws. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glittering skyline. My heart was steady, calm. For years I had carried the fire of betrayal like a brand on my skin. Now it was ice in my veins. Elena had taken everything from me. Soon I would take everything from her. The call came the next morning. Miss Hale, my lawyer said, his tone clipped with urgency. The Bennett Group's line of credit has been officially revoked. With the debts you control, they'll come knocking within weeks. I smiled, the kind of smile that came from a place deeper than joy. Good, I said. Let them knock. Because when Elena opened that door, I'd be waiting on the other side. The boardroom didn't smell like home anymore. It smelled like fear. The kind that hides under cologne and polished wood, seeping out from nervous hands gripping pens too tightly, from the quick glances men in expensive suits exchanged across the table. I sat at the head of that table now. Not officially, not yet. Elena still clung to the chair beside me, her back straight, her lips curved into a smile so brittle it looked ready to shatter. But everyone knew who held the power in the room. Miss Bennett, one of the board members began, his voice thin. The situation has become untenable. Elena's eyes flashed, her painted smile tightening. Temporary setbacks. We've faced worse. I've already secured talks with new investors. Talks? I interrupted smoothly, my voice calm as water. But no commitments. Correct. Her gaze snapped to me. For weeks she had been trying to box me out, to reduce me to an outsider at the table. But with every passing day her defenses crumbled. He had to acknowledge me now. Cassandra, she said through clenched teeth, this isn't your concern. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. On the contrary, when your creditors start showing up at your door, it becomes very much my concern. The silence was suffocating. Several board members shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. They knew. I owned the debts. The unraveling hadn't been dramatic. No fiery collapse, no scandal splashed across headlines, just the slow tightening of a noose Elena had never noticed until it was too late. A supplier suddenly demanding payment in full. A bank pulling its line of credit. A partner pulling out of a deal at the last moment. Each move precise, deliberate. Each move mine. And now here we sat, the walls closing in. Miss Hale, the board member said finally, his voice deferential, what solution do you propose? Elena's head whipped toward him. You're asking her? She controls the debt, another muttered, his tone almost apologetic. Her face paled. She looked at me, then really looked for the first time. I held her gaze, letting her see the calm certainty in my eyes. Liquidation is one option, I said lightly as though discussing the weather. But I'd prefer a cleaner solution. A transfer of ownership. That way the Bennett Group can remain intact and your reputation, Miss Bennett, remains salvageable. Her chair scraped sharply against the floor as she stood. You can't be serious. This is my company. My family's company. I rose slowly, my movements deliberate. Funny. I seem to remember another family member once saying the same thing. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. A memory tugging at the edges of her perfect facade. She blinked, her lips parting. Claire. The word was barely a whisper, but it was enough to send a tremor through the room. I smiled. Not Cassandra Hale's polished investor smile. Claire's. Hello, sister. The boardroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, chairs shifting. Elena's hand trembled on the back of her chair. How? She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. This is impossible. Not impossible, I said softly. Just inevitable. She staggered back a step, her heels clicking against the polished floor. You planned this. All these years. Yes, I said simply. While you were buying gowns and throwing parties, I was buying your debt. Piece by piece. Quietly. Carefully. Until everything you own, everything you stole, is mine. Her hands balled into fists. You think this makes you better than me? You think Father would be proud of this? The mention of him was a knife, but I didn't flinch. I met her fury with calm steel. Father wanted us to build this together. You made sure that never happened. You left me with nothing, Elena. Do you remember what you told me that night? That I'd always have a place here. Her face crumpled just slightly. This, I continued, gesturing to the papers the lawyers had brought in, is my place. She tried to fight. Of course she did. She raised her voice, pleaded with the board, accused me of deception. But the men who once fawned over her avoided her eyes now, their loyalty shifting like sand. In the end, her signature shook as she scrawled it across the transfer documents. I watched her hand move, steady as stone. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. When it was done, she dropped the pen as though it had burned her. I picked it up, twirling it between my fingers. Thank you, Elena. You've always been so generous. She looked at me then, eyes glistening with something raw, fear, hatred, disbelief. You've destroyed me. I leaned closer, my voice low enough for only her to hear. No. I've only given you what you gave me. Nothing. After the boardroom emptied, I stood alone at the head of the table. The city glittered through the windows, the skyline stretching endlessly. For the first time in years I felt whole. Not joyous. Not triumphant. Just steady. Balanced. Justice had a weight to it, and tonight I carried it easily. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass. The crown Elena had stolen wasn't on her head anymore. It was on mine. And it fit perfectly. Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it simply waits, until the silence is louder than any cry. If you've ever bided your time in silence, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, stay patient. Stay unbreakable.